Alright, I am Rob, and today I am going to be doing some talking. This is something I'm calling the COVID files because, well, I've been knocked out of work a bit because I've come down with COVID. It seems like it's the less offensive Omicron variant, which basically expresses itself like a cold to the point where I only recently found out that I had even had it. So, I figured I would take that time and put it to good use by putting out a video or two about my past, something that relatively easy for me to do and might be entertaining for you. In this case, I've opened up one of my vault boxes. Back when I had subscriptions to RPG Crate, I found out that these boxes, after getting one of those a month, they actually work pretty good for storing character sheets. So, this is the particular one for my characters from Star Wars the Role-Playing Game by West End Games. Different editions, but we'll start with the first one off the top. These are not in any kind of alphabetical order. In fact, I haven't looked at these sheets in a very long time. So I'm just going to try to pull out what might have been an interesting story or two out of them. Maybe cemented a little bit in my past. Maybe some of this might even be illuminative in describing some of what I was into back in the day. All of these are going to be from, back in my college days, so we're looking in the 90s here, so. Alright, this character is Czech Pomorak. He is a primitive warrior, written on loose leaf sheets. Apparently I cut most of the trim off, or I folded the trim off on one side and didn't do so on the other. But it's on two different sheets. Handwritten, I liked to do things that way back in the day. I still kind of have a soft spot for handwritten sheets, but not as much. Now I appreciate how much more it saves me time if I just print them off myself. Czech was a primitive warrior. This was done in 2nd edition. I know this because he has a slot for, is he force sensitive? No. Force sensitivity was something that came out in 2nd edition. It allowed you to gain force points quicker and was required for you to become a student of the Force. That could have been a Jedi, that could have been some other discipline, that could have been Sith, but for purposes of this game, because this was purely from the Rebellion era, my character was not force sensitive because he was just going to be a nasty fighter type. And as a primitive, that didn't necessarily mean, because remember, Star Wars is futuristic technology, that didn't mean he would be completely worthless, but, well, we'll get into that. His skills, he had decent dexterity, decent knowledge. I don't know why I chose decent knowledge. I guess I just took the primitive warrior template, probably. The only thing he was bad at was technical at 2 dice. Which was baseline human. So he didn't have any special training in that, which makes sense being primitive. But even in knowledge is at 3D plus 1, strength 3D plus 2, dexterity 3D plus 1, the other one's 3D. So he was solid, all things considered, until it came to technical, which really did make sense. It was a really relatively light weakness to have, considering there's always somebody in the group who is decent at technical skills. And yet, at the same time, most of his skills that he had actually put points into were technical. It's funny, but under technical skills, he has armor repair, specializing in chainmail. He didn't put a lot into that. I'm putting 1 pip at a time into these, and then specializing, so... Chainmail, mind you. Chainmail, yes, in Star Wars. Melee weapon repair. It's another pip. Specializing in the chainsaw. Yes, this is the mindset that I went into this character. When confronted with a vast galaxy, I want a guy with a submachine gun and a chainsaw to, yeah. Firearms repair, specializing in munitions. And this was black powder up to solid projectile ammo. Perception skills, not much. Bargain, a little search. Strength, brawling, 1 die into that. He didn't really specialize in anything great. His melee skill was just 40 plus 1, so only 1 die in that. But he did specialize in the chainsaw. And he could get that up to 6 die eventually. So he was good with his chainsaw. Melee parry 4 dice, dodge 4 dice, firearms 3 dice plus 2. No blaster skill, never used one. Specialized in the submachine gun for 5d plus 1, so I milked those specialization rules for what they were worth, clearly. Knowledge, willpower, intimidation, specializing intimidation with the chainsaw. DM let me do it. Planetary systems, and then he had repulsor lift operation and starship gunnery, which are mechanical, not necessarily technological, so nothing big there. This was a fairly primitive character. Back in the day, that's all I cared about was being efficient in a fight. So most of the other stuff, and as far as anything deep, that wasn't what we were going for with this campaign. It was going to be a lot of fighting and running around. This was very short term. I went for an entire afternoon. I think we started early and then ended up later into the evening. I found out the hard way that a person can only drink so much chocolate milk. I thought I'd be a little healthier rather than getting a big old bottle of soda, as I was wont to do back in college. I got a big half-gallon of chocolate milk, and I thought I would drink that. Apparently you can only do that so far, and I got very sick. So I learned about you can't drink too much chocolate milk, but that's the more memorable thing I remember about this character than anything else. He ended with over 4,000 credits. He had a chainsaw, and I don't know how it happened, but for some reason it ended up with a die code of 7 die plus 2, piggybacking off of his strength, but I don't know how it got to do so much damage. The Game Master wasn't particularly skilled. He just really wanted to tell a Star Wars story, so he let me make this abomination. The difficulty was quite high at 17, so with my skill, I would make that a fair amount of the time, but if somebody was trying to dodge, I would have a little bit of a tough time hitting people. Ammo, 30 minutes of use to a tank. That's probably reasonable. He had a vibro knuckle dusters. Those could do 40 plus 2 damage, not bad. Submachine gun, 3 dice base damage, holding 20 rounds, and I don't know if I ever got any good ammo for it. Oh wait, I did. I had 23 rounds of experimental explosive armor piercing rounds. Just throw everything you can on it to make it sound good. It was, it allowed him to do 5d damage with it, as much damage as a blaster rifle or a heavy blaster pistol, but it had a high mishap chance, which was again something that you could find in 2nd edition that wasn't in the 1st. He also had some explosive submachine gun rounds that did not have mishap and could do 4 dice damage. He had detonate, which was plastic explosives basically. Bunch of blaster packs, a light repeating blaster that he never used, and a heavy blaster pistol that he never used, and a holdout blaster pistol that he, again, never used. So all these weapons I'm toting around just because somebody had to carry them, I guess. And a light repeating blaster is a silly weapon for a person to be toting around casually, so. And he had bounty hunter armor. This was seriously just broken. And I can't tell you of any great deeds that he did. He was the person who would crash into a scenario, basically, and come in chainsaw revving and most other people didn't know what to make of him because nobody ran around with chainsaws in Star Wars. So as far as a fish out of water story, he kind of was that. But all in all, I'm not proud of him as a character. He didn't break any grounds for me. It was just playing something goofy that wasn't Star Wars in a Star Wars game. For what it was worth, the Game Master was a good sport in letting me play that abomination. He apparently let me get away with a lot, because I see stuff in there that I had no idea. I do remember one thing. He was so worried about his bloody chainsaw that at one point we found armor for a light transport, I believe it was. And I'm like, well, armor is metal, isn't it? Yeah, it's a special kind of starship grade metal. I'm like, can I take a piece of it? How big? Oh, I just need a piece about, oh, this wide, about, this long, about this thick. Easy. Sure, you can find that. There's patching material here. Excellent. So I went and, using my crafting skill, I basically replaced the blade arm of the chainsaw with effectively starship armor plate. And I think that's how I got the damage code up to that stupid level. As a game master now, I would never do something like that. This character is clearly ridiculous. Would have been an okay character if I was only interested in an action-oriented game, and after a little rebalancing, low level, strictly. He was not anything to write home about. So, not something I'm particularly proud of, but also something that, as far as the grand scheme of things, and I'm pretty sure the game master who ran the game was going to watch this, it was, from what I remember, a neat little game. We bounced around in the Outer Rim, and the other characters were more useful to the story than I was. I was just kind of also there. And I think I'm almost positive it was the last time that I actually played with that group. Not because the group was bad. Actually, I think I enjoyed that session a bit. But at the same time, they weren't really into gaming as much as I was. And it was a fun way to spend a Saturday. That's, again, about all I can really remember of it. So that's what you get from that character. Let's find something a little more interesting, hopefully. And who are you? Oh dear. It figures you would be the next one. Oh, you'd be the next two. Okay, we'll go with you. These are character sheets that a friend of mine ended up making for us. We found these to be a lot more efficient than the official Star Wars character sheets. This shout out to my friend Bill back in college. He knew more about computers than the rest of us, so he could whip together a character sheet like this easily enough, with his own little fonts, and it looked nice. But realistically, in Star Wars, all you really need, the base stuff for your personal character, enough room for your stats and your skills, you're going to depend off of those, a couple rooms for your weapons, and then everything else, equipment and notes, and that'll get you through a campaign. This character, when I think of all the things that make me happy about Star Wars, the role-playing game, this is one character that I will frequently pick up on. This was Lakham Chobash. Lakham Chobash, I eventually found out that, even though I don't speak Yiddish or anything, I guess Lakham means something in that, but I don't know. I just kind of threw it all together and it sounded good on my tongue. Star Wars-y enough. He was a chaotic Jedi. Now, if you haven't played Star Wars, there are some classes or character choices that you can make in some games that are infamous. For instance, if you're playing Vampire the Masquerade and somebody really wants to play a Malkavian because they got this great character idea, some people that's a red flag because Malkavians can be very chaotic and unreliable. Basically sacrificing everything that's really going around that's important to the whims of their own dementia. There's a variety of such classes. Dungeons and Dragons warlocks to a certain extent can be that way because, well, your character's compromised. You already owe somebody outside of the group a favor for your powers, and when are they going to come calling? And especially if you have an infernal warlock, it's like, oh, now if I'm good, I might inherently have to kind of turn against you because your master is... Yeah, that happens. This chaotic Jedi is named after the grand tradition of Don Quixote. Don Quixote, of course, a fictional character who could not come to terms with reality and lived his life through almost a hallucinating lens, choosing to believe that he was a knight from days gone by with his manservant Sancho Panza, I believe, and the idea of a person riding a horse and tilting with a lance against a windmill is Quixote. It's somebody who is so divorced from reality, they're almost a danger to themselves and at the very least pitiable. And a chaotic Jedi is someone who swears they're a Jedi, but they're not. They've never actually been trained as a Jedi. They may have heard stories and they've dreamed about it, and now to the point where they believe they're kind of Jedi, they try to live like a Jedi, but at the same time they do have a spark. But it's not the traditional way that Jedi learn. They can sense the Force, but they can't control it. And they can't use it to change the environment around them, but they do have a leg up, and if they get some training, they may actually end up being a Jedi. Now, I had no delusions about my chances of actually becoming a Jedi, but I thought the character was interesting enough. Lakham Chobash was crazy. He wanted to be a Jedi in a time when the Jedi were hunted across the galaxy and exterminated. He was the child of nobility, but he was so enraptured in his Jedi stories. His parents eventually became mortified because it's not cool if your son is going to throw down and tell other people the Imperials are evil and that the Jedi should rise back up again. That's the kind of talk that gets your family in a lot of trouble. So Lakham was boarded up on a sanitarium ship, basically under the care of questionable medical professionals, to make sure that he never came back to trouble his parents and his family again. This was seen as preferable to the Imperials having their way with him. And probably was. The problem was the way he got introduced to the group that he would eventually travel with was when the group attacked the sanatorium ship, which caused the inmates to be let free. Yeah, one of those being Lakham Chobash. And Lakham basically walked to the cabin of the bridge and declared himself the captain. Lakham, fairly average-looking human, not bad-looking. Matter of fact, you should look at his stats right away, because it's been ages since I, cared about what his stats were. I just remember the character fondly. He was quite dexterous, not very good at knowledge, not very good at mechanical, not very good at technical, but he had decent perception, average strength for a starting player character, and he had a force point. Or a point in sense, so he could sense the Force. And his starting equipment was a bathrobe, a fencing foil, and it was important to me that he have a flashlight. Now, you could call it a glow stick, but this was purely a flashlight. I wanted to look very much like a flashlight, because I don't know if you've ever done this, but when I was a child, after watching Star Wars, a flashlight was a lightsaber. You get it, you turn it on, you can imagine the blade coming out as the flashlight lit up, and it's weightless, so it feels like a lightsaber would be. The blade itself is, and the center of balance is on those batteries in the flashlight, so you're and you feel like you've got a lightsaber in your hand. It's only until I played Beat Saber when I really got to appreciate that, but still. He had a flashlight, convinced that it was a lightsaber. And when the party took the bridge, there's my character, standing there in a bathrobe with his flashlight and his fencing foil, and that's it. I had a little cash, but nothing of any great consequence. And the group's like, "Who are you? Are you the captain?" "Well, I am a Jedi Master. I am Jedi Master Lakham Chobash at your service." Like, "Okay, you're a Jedi Master, are you?" "Oh, yes." And the whole part of this character was in making a character who's so ridiculous, totally bought into being a Jedi and completely believing it, no matter how much trouble it caused him or the group. Now, with this character, it's useful to know the group that I was surrounding myself with early on. Because this was as ragtag a group as you could get. The characters included a pacifist Gamorrean. You know Gamorrean, the large pigmen guards in Jabba the Hutt's palace with the big pig faces, really strong. Well, he was one of those, but a pacifist. He wasn't a big thug or a dull brute. He was a philosopher of his people, and he did not like violence. We had an R2 unit who was a sarcastic, broken soul by the time we got done with that campaign, because he couldn't believe how bad we were at what we were doing. We had a squib. A squib is blue. They are about the size of Jawas. You could almost insert them as Jawas for what a lot of people might think. Ours was a kleptomaniac who stole anything small that he could. And in our ship, he claimed the air vents for himself, barricading himself in, creating blockages to threaten the rest of us with a cessation of life support if we didn't do what he wanted. I mean, he was a rather annoying little fellow. And I can't remember everyone else in the group, but those were the ones that would stick out the most strongly. So they took me into their ship, and I became one with a cause, because it seemed like they were fighting against the Empire, and I was all about fighting against the Empire because I'm a Jedi. Well, at various points, I decided that I was going to create Jedi wisdom where my character didn't know any Jedi wisdom. So frequently I would put out a bogus philosophy and act upon it to the hilt and let the world kind of deal with it. So for instance, we were flying along and I decided my character wasn't going to wear clothes. And I believe it was the R2 unit, said, you seem to have taken your outer wrappings off. Is there a problem? And my character looked at him soulfully and said, you know, clothing only gets in the way to the Force. Nudity is how one truly reaches out to the Force. And he was scared, and he ran away and didn't want to deal with me. When I eventually found the Gamorrean, the Gamorrean's like, why aren't you wearing clothes? It's like, clothing gets in the way of our connection to the Force. Nudity is the way to the Force. And he just took off all of his clothes, too, and we tromped around the ship completely naked. The squib was scared to death and hid in that was the point, he hid in the air vents and did not want to come out for anything. So it was an interesting time. Lockham did a lot of strange things, which caused us problems. The biggest one that I can remember was dealing with Imperial Security Bureau types and customs. That's a problem because when one of the players actually goes out and says, I'm a Jedi, and if you're an Imperial, you know what you're supposed to do with Jedi, but he's clearly out of his rocker. I believe one of the other people was the captain of our ship, probably a smuggler. We always had a smuggler with us. And it would frequently turn out that they would try to shut my character up or not allow him to be seen by the Imperials in his bathrobe. I don't think he ever got an actual Jedi robe or anything. I think he basically went through that campaign in basically a bathrobe. Just double checking real quick, but old dueling sword. Oh, he had some makeshift armor that gave him +1 physical soaking. Nothing against blasters. But he was good for a couple. We did end up finding a teacher. He did learn a little bit of control, and he did learn a couple of useful skills. He learned Magnify Senses, Life Detection, and Danger Sense, which would really help out. But here's the thing. We had a squib, and the squib was a great experimenter. He loved doing all kinds of fun little things. So at one point we were confronted by some customs. They stopped us, and my character got to talk. And I told them to surrender, because I was a Jedi Master, and I was going to take their ship under my protection as they had been accused of war crimes working with the Imperials. And he's wearing his Imperial uniform, and he's backed up by some Imperial Navy guys who were seconded to the customs, and they weren't thrilled with being there dealing with this lunatic either. And I told them I would have to ignite my lightsaber, and once I did that, I couldn't be held responsible anymore. I gave them every option to surrender. And he said something like, "Go ahead, hit me with your lightsaber," because he could see it was a flashlight. What he couldn't see is that the squib had put a blaster charge into it. So it was good for one shot. When I activated it, it kicked one blaster bolt out. Very, very inaccurate. It didn't have the housing of a gun. It was just basically a one, boom. And wouldn't you know it, turned it on, activated it, and shot that guy right out of his boots. And the whole time, my character's like, I warned him. I shall meditate on this and on his failure and hope that the Force receives him gently. And everyone, just deadpan. I was so into this character. I could do all of these things with just being in character, and it was fun, endlessly fun. Despite the fact that I rarely actually contributed to the storyline moving forward, every once in a while my skills did come in at just the right pace. And it actually became fairly useful to the group that they had somebody who was such an obvious distraction while all the other group did all the shenanigans. Everyone else was focusing on my character, even though he's a lunatic. So the one time, though, that it cements him in my memory, and I never want to forget this, was our group was so large. We had to separate into two separate groups with two separate game masters. And our game masters would change. I took a turn running a game. It was very memorable. One of these days I'll have to, if anybody ever wants to know that story, I'll relate it because I was very proud of it. But one point we changed some of the people over. Rebel Command wanted us to change our makeup up. And we ended up picking up a Wookiee and a brash pilot who himself was training to become a Jedi. Familiar story. The gamer was an alpha gamer who liked just making powerful characters. And in this case, he made a pretty decent character, but again, following the blueprints, brash pilot turning to Jedi. And he eventually got to be a halfway credible young Jedi. My character, not so much. But we were introducing our characters to each other and everything. And yes, I am the Jedi Master Lakham Chobash. And he's like, huh, you look awfully young to be a Jedi Master. I mean, Jedi have been around for 20 years, and you're 20, 22, 23? Well, I am a Master. The Force can do miraculous things. He's like, okay. Well, I had a Master, and he didn't talk like you, so I don't know. At one point, apparently they had gone on a mission where the mission was to infiltrate this derelict ship. And there were all kinds of creatures on this ship gathered from all over Star Wars. There was a Rancor in that ship, but there was a baby Sarlacc in the ship. And they stumbled upon it. It was basically a zoo. They stumbled upon the baby Sarlacc, and no doubt using some Force points, the Wookiee went and beat the crap out of the baby Sarlacc and killed it with his bare hands. Impressive, certainly. Implausible? Probably, but, role-playing games. So, we couldn't understand Wookiee, so it turned out that you could have one person who detached to who could seem to understand you, whatever you'd say, and this was this brash pilot. And he told us, and he's so strong, he defeated a baby Sarlacc with his bare hands. And I looked at him across the table, and I coolly deadpanned, the ability to destroy a baby Sarlacc is insignificant next to the power of the Force. And I said that deadpan, which they thought was so funny. They busted out laughing and laughed and laughed. And the whole table just broke down, because not only was it timely, and it was totally in character, but it was a Star Wars quote, and that's always funnier when you're playing Star Wars, right? Just like you're always going to know at least one person who's going to say, I have a bad feeling about this, you know. But in this case, it was just the right time, and I pulled it off, and everybody started laughing so hard. The other group wanted to know what we said, and they either knew my character or they knew the events that were being referred to about that baby Sarlacc. And when they heard my response, they all broke down laughing. And together, the two groups from across this very large basement, we lost 10, 15 minutes just paralyzed with laughter. It was so good to get everybody laughing at the same time about this, and all in character too. It didn't, you know, I didn't have to break character to because I was terrible with puns and my own attempts at humor back in college. This wasn't that. This was in character, just this release and relaxation of all this hilarity for this role-playing game that we all enjoyed together. So, Lackham, I couldn't tell you a single thing that he did that was absolutely amazing. He was a part, I believe that everybody who was in that group with him will probably remember that character, and I always like to consider that to be my win state. Not necessarily that I got the most kills or that I did the coolest thing, although when you do that cool thing, that's great. But with Lackham, it was making people laugh, it was making that campaign more interesting and fun. And I don't know if Lackham died, because he was not the only character that I ran in that particular group. As a matter of fact, the other person, well, tell you what, I'll save that one for the next one. After all, I could be out for a few days, so it's a pretty sure bet that the COVID files will continue on. So, until next time, I'm Rob. Thanks for joining me, and until the next time, I have more stories to tell, many boxes of these characters, so hopefully you enjoy this. Until that time, farewell.